Here's John Lennox to ask what he thinks is a gotcha question for atheists.
We have this trust as scientists, as mathematicians, in human reason. We rely on our human reason to get to our conclusions.
I wouldn't say that I rely on human reason to get to my conclusions so much as it's simply the only way my mind can operate. It's the only way to produce conclusions at all.
Now, in the 1940s, C.S. Lewis was writing about this, and I think people didn't really grasp what he was saying. What he was saying is this. He said any theory of mind that undermines the validity of human reason cannot be true because you reach that theory by reasoning.
Not true. If someone used their mind to come up with a theory of mind that said everything minds come up with is false, then that would be contradictory. That couldn't be a true theory. However, a theory of mind that says that what minds come up with might be true, but is not necessarily true, is not contradictory. Whether our minds were created by a god or not, I think we can all agree that human minds are fallible. Simply acknowledging that fact undermines the validity of human reasoning. To undermine human reasoning is not to discard it entirely.
Okay. Again, this is another heavy one. I want to pause.
Yes,
That's
beautiful.
These are big ideas, but they're very, very important ideas. He phrased it in such a way, Lewis did, at some point, I can't remember the exact quote, but he says, if the universe made no sense, we should never have discovered that. We never would be able to discover that.
Well, yeah, because the idea that anything in the universe doesn't make sense would be unfalsifiable. Even if we found something that looked like it doesn't make sense, we could never be sure that we're not just failing to make sense of it. There are lots of things in nature that we don't understand, but even if we never succeed at making sense of them, we could never be sure that we're just not able to figure them out. We could never be sure that they don't make perfect sense, and we're just failing to understand them. However, that also doesn't mean that everything in the universe does make sense. We simply can't be sure either way.
That is part of it. That goes down to the root of it. And the reason for it, and he put it brilliantly, but it wasn't in the center of the big debate, not to the extent it is today. Because what's happened in the last 4 or 5 years is that a very prominent atheist is beginning to use Lewis's arguments. And that has changed the balance completely.
And who is that?
It's Thomas Nagel.
In New York City?
In New York City,
NYU.
that's right.
I'm not convinced that this is an accurate representation of Nagel's views. He's mostly known for arguing that our current understanding of physics can't explain consciousness. I wish Lennox gave an exact quote of Nagel using Lewis's argument, because I've never heard Nagel argue that we can't formulate a theory of mind that acknowledges human fallibility.
That's right. But if you like, I'll backtrack a bit so that we can unpack this so that it makes a kind of sense.
Yeah.
Lewis is suggesting that if you undermine the validity of reason, your theory's wrong.
That does not logically follow. Simply acknowledging that human reasoning is fallible does not mean that every conclusion it draws is wrong. It only means that it is possibly wrong. That's not a contradiction. Does Lennox deny that the way humans reason is fallible?
Now, I'm suggesting that that's why Wigner said mathematics is unreasonably effective, because his worldview, which was atheistic, followed to its logical conclusion, actually destroys rational thought.
Mathematics was invented to describe observation. It's not unreasonably effective for a tool developed to describe observation to be able to describe observation. That's to be expected. I'll put a link in the description to a video I did which goes into greater detail about why math doesn't need to be supernatural in order to work.
Now, let me put it in the form of a discussion I frequently have. I tease people, my fellow colleagues. They like being teased, you see. And I say to them, tell me what you do science with. And of course, if they're in the physical sciences, they'll tell me about some very expensive piece of equipment. They've got $1 billion. I said, no, I don't mean that. I mean, oh, they say, you mean my, and they're about to say mind when they remember it's not politically correct to say mind. So they say,
I had no idea things have gotten to the point where it's no longer politically correct to say mind.
oh yes, you got to say brain.
Politically correct? Are scientists being canceled on Twitter for saying mind? I highly doubt this is the case, and the mind is just a physical activity that the brain carries out. Talking about the mind is in no way any more incompatible with physicalism than talking about software.
The mind is the brain because everything is physical.
Okay,
Everything can be reduced to physical.
I was going to say let's make sure that that's clear to the audience.
Yes.
Because this is an amazing idea. The idea that the mind is not the same as the brain.
The mind is an activity carried out by the brain. That's the difference.
The idea that if we were only moist robots, as somebody disgustingly put it,
computing meat.
If that were the case, then in effect, anything like a computer ought to develop consciousness.
That's like saying that if pocket calculators are just simple computers, then pocket calculators ought to be able to play Fortnite.
But nothing that we ever know of except humans has consciousness. So the mind is separate from our mere brains.
If the mind is completely separate from the brain, then why do we even have brains? If brains aren't doing the thinking, then what are they doing? What function do brains serve if it's actually our minds doing the thinking? Does Metaxas believe, like Aristotle did, that the brain only serves to cool the blood?
But it has gotten to the point, and I just wanted to annotate that or underscore that you're saying that in the world of science at Oxford, people are afraid to use the word mind because it implies that there's something beyond the physical material brain.
Citation needed. I'm very skeptical that Oxford scientists are afraid to use the word mind.
But yes, that's right, but it's not all people. If we step back from this, let's put this in a bigger framework. What we're up against in the culture is the logical conclusion of a materialistic view of the universe. See, let's go back to Socrates and Plato because that'll help make things clear. In the world of their time, about 300 BC or so, the Greeks were divided in their view of the big question. What is the nature of ultimate reality? Now, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle all believed in the gods. They believed there was something more than the physical universe. But Democritus and Leucippus, who were geniuses because they developed the atomic theory.
I want to make it clear that I did not transcribe these subtitles. There wasn't a guy in ancient Greece named Leucippus. Lennox is clearly talking about Leucippus.
And the atomic theory is one of the most important things ever discovered. Richard Feynman actually made a very interesting statement. He said if all of science was lost, but there was one result that we could preserve to pass to the next generation, just one, it would have to be the atomic theory. That everything is made of atoms. Now, atomos means indivisible. We know they're divisible, but the basic idea is there is stuff, very tiny stuff, and everything, but everything is made of that stuff.
But but I have to say, as proud as I am to be a Greek, the idea that someone in Greece in the 4th century, Democritus, came up with that idea, how in the world, without going into this too much, but how could they back then have come up with this idea?
Well, by a brilliant piece of reasoning. They could take a piece of wood and they could cut it, and it was smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And they reckoned there must be a point at which that process stops by something that couldn't be cut. And this is the basic stuff of reality. But then they made a leap that this would be all of reality.
I'm not sure that Lennox is accurately describing the atomists here. He seems to think that they inferred materialism from atomism. I don't see why they would infer from the fact that matter is made of indivisible particles that therefore nothing immaterial exists. Lennox is accusing the atomists of making a bizarre non sequitur that I'm not convinced they actually made.
Now that view barrels up through the centuries and it sits in Oxford. It's in fact the dominant philosophy in Western academia, and we call it materialism. Now there's another version which we call naturalism. They're both atheistic, they both deny anything beyond, but some give a little bit more weight to the existence of mind that's independent of matter. Now, if you are a materialist, then you're going to say that when everything else is said, mind reduces to brain. That's all it is. Brain reduces to physics and chemistry, and all we are is physics and chemistry. Now, back to my little story, you see. Let's suppose that's true for a minute. And I say to my friends, tell me what you do science with. I do it with my brain. Tell me about your brain. I have great fun with this. I love it. Tell me about your brain. What is the brain? Give me the short story. Well, the short story is the brain is the end product of a mindless, unguided process. And I look at them and I smile and I say this, and you trust it.
I don't completely trust it, no. I recognize that it's fallible. In fact, the whole point of science is to work around our brain's tendency toward biases and misperceptions. We wouldn't need a rigorous epistemic method to formulate models of reality that consistently seem to predict experience if our brains were completely trustworthy. The important thing, though, is that even if I believe that there is a God who created my mind, I still wouldn't completely trust it, because even if God created our minds, He created them to be fallible. Even if there is a God, we clearly still make mistakes. Acknowledging that fact in no way means that every conclusion we draw is therefore false.
You trust it. Now tell me honestly, and I let this sink in, if you knew that the computer you use in your laboratory or any of the instruments was the end product of a mindless, unguided process, would you trust it?
No, but I don't completely trust instruments anyway because they were designed by fallible human minds. The numbers on my ruler could have been misprinted. My computer software could have a bug in it that is producing incorrect calculations. The lenses in my microscope could have impurities in them causing me to see things that aren't really there. However, do I therefore disregard all evidence collected with rulers, computers, and microscopes? No, I don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Lennox talks as though if human minds are created by evolution and not by an intelligent designer, we can have no confidence in them whatsoever, and that just doesn't logically follow.
I've never had the answer yes to that. No. And yet, now, I say, there's a problem there. Can you not see? That you are using something that your theories, that is your philosophy, your worldview of what is ultimate reality, is destroying the very thing you want to trust.
No, it's not destroying it. It's simply acknowledging our mind's limitations. Limitations that are clearly present even if our minds were created by an intelligent designer. To everyone who helps me out on Patreon, you're a big help. Thanks so much.